The Trevor Zegras trade rumors have caused a massive shakeup in the NHL, and Bleacher Report has released 5 mock trades for Trevor Zegras that are absolutely wild. We're going to be taking a look at all of them to see which ones I agree and disagree with, as well as 5 of my own mock trades for Trevor Zegras that I think can actually happen. But what trades do Bleacher Report think could actually happen, and what are my mock trades for Trevor Zegras and which teams could actually land him in the end? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the different mock trades. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more trade rumor content just like this as we lead up to this year's trade deadline. And here it is, top trades and landing spots for Ducks forward Trevor Zegras by Lyle Richardson. Now, when we talked about Trevor Zegras and the potential trade regarding the Montreal Canadiens, we ended up putting a mock trade out there that I thought was kind of realistic for Zegras if he were to go to Montreal. I've then also put on some more value on top of that. What it was a Joshua Waugh, of Josh Anderson, a 2025 first-round pick, and a defenseman like Jaden Struble. It would take a lot to acquire a player like Trevor Zegras for how young he is, even if his value is probably at the lowest it's ever been. But as we talked about in that video, Trevor Zegras is still a player offensively that can bring a lot to the game, and this year has just been a disaster for him in terms of health and luck, and it's just been a complete storm for him. But you can see over the last couple of seasons before this, 60-point plus back-to-back seasons. This is the guy that can be a top 6 forward and offensively a first-line guy. But in that video, we only talked about Montreal and a potential fit there and what a mock trade could look like, but there's a few other teams that could really be in the mix for Zegras that this article ends up touching on. Now, before getting into the actual mock trades, Lyle Richardson makes a great point talking about what we talked about before a little bit with the Ducks' priorities changing, saying that they got players like Gauthier, Carlson, Mason McTavish, and noting that the style of game that Verbeek wanted his club to play doesn't really fit in line with Zegras, having a lot of bad penalties and undisciplined defensive play. That's what we took into a little bit of a part in our mock trade, but also regarding these, that will also fill into things. What Verbeek wants as a GM is different than what other GMs want. He's prioritizing, especially in his prospect pool, a lot more grittiness, a lot more determination, and you can see that in the prospects he's drafted. Now going on to the first mock trade of the bunch, the first team that ends up being linked to Trevor Zegras is the Chicago Blackhawks. And honestly, if we made like a top 3 most likely Trevor Zegras trade candidates, the Blackhawks would probably be among them. Lyle says that Chicago lacks an establishing young star who can help Bedard navigate the burden of early stardom as well as provide some much needed scoring depth for this low scoring club, saying Trevor Zegras could be a solid fit on either Bedard's wing or centering their second line. Personally, I think he fits a lot better as Bedard's wing. Just in terms of being a center, he hasn't really fit into that role with Anaheim, at least defensively, but who knows what ends up happening. Chicago obviously is pretty weak in a lot of areas, and maybe Zegras is able to mix and match. But regarding what Chicago could end up giving up in a trade, he says the Ducks could prefer a young player like Reichel or Kurchinski or a prospect like Nazar as a part of their return for Zegras. Chicago also possesses an extra first-round pick in 2024 and 2025, along with 3 second-rounders in this year's draft that they could dangle as trade bait. Now, basically what that comes to is that the Blackhawks would receive Trevor Zegras. In exchange, the Anaheim Ducks would likely receive, at least in terms of what this trade offer is proposing, Frank Nazar, a 2025 first-round pick, and a 2025 second-rounder would be the LA Kings. Now, this trade to me would be fascinating because, again, he ends up talking about Chicago trading one of their first-rounders, which to me would be almost impossible. I mean, this year it's going to be a top 3 pick. Next year, it's probably also going to be at least a top 5 pick. And I think Chicago giving up any first rounders, at least in this stage of the rebuild, is a non-starter. Now, when we talk about mock trades and what Bleacher Report is proposing here, it would probably be Chicago getting Trevor Zegras back. In exchange, the Anaheim Ducks would likely receive a prospect like Frank Nazar, a 2024 first-round pick, which would probably be the Tampa Bay Lightnings, definitely not giving up Chicago's, and a 2024 second-rounder, which would be the LA Kings. Now, this will be interesting. Obviously, we know that Chicago is not going to give up one of their first-round picks because that is way too valuable. But Tampa's would be interesting considering they're in the playoff race, but they're not a playoff lock by any means. Maybe they're outside of the playoffs by the time the season is over, and maybe that brings some more value to the pick there, but it would be really fascinating, especially a prospect like Nazar going back. Now, going on to my own mock trade regarding a Chicago Zegras deal, the problem that really comes up is that I would love to negotiate a player like Nazar to Anaheim, but I don't really know if prospect-wise, that's a prospect that Anaheim is really looking for, at least in terms of the style they're putting out. Now, going on to my own mock trade here, to Anaheim, Anaheim, in exchange for Trevor Zegras, I think they will end up getting Philip Kurashev, who has been having a very solid year with Chicago, 23 points in 37 games this year. Lucas Reichel, who hasn't really established himself yet with Chicago completely, but I think in a new system could do a lot of good. Gavin Hayes, who was a third-round pick in 2022, looking really solid, was a pretty solid piece of the U.S.'s gold medal winning team on that bottom six, looked pretty good there. And Wyatt Kaiser, who at 21 years old is developing decently in the AHL, nothing incredibly well, but I think could be a bottom pair D for the Ducks. And of course, going back in terms of picks, would be a 2024 first rounder, which would be the Tampa Bay Lightning, and a 2024 second rounder, which would be the LA Kings. The problem is I don't think there is one amazing prospect in Chicago's system that I think really fits Anaheim's needs. Maybe an Alex Vlasic would fit that bill, but I also don't think Chicago would be willing to give him up at all, considering how good and steady he has been defensively already in his young career. So it kind of limits the options there. But I think this is a good blend of forward and defensive depth, as well as picks going back that Anaheim would covet. Next up, going on to the second team in the Trevor Zegras sweepstakes, Lyle Richardson ends up suggesting the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, in terms of what Columbus could give up, they say the Jackets are poised to land a high pick in 2024. Given their depth and good young talent, they might be willing to give up that pick along with a prospect for Zegras. They could also offer up a deal centered around a young forward like Sillinger or Johnson. So basically what Lyles is saying here, that it would be a player like Trevor Zegras back to Columbus for a first rounder and a prospect, or it would be Zegras for a player like Kent Johnson and maybe something on top of that. As for, I think, the more realistic deal, it would probably end up being that 2024 first, which I could see Columbus giving up in the end if they aren't too confident in the top end of that draft, and if they don't get a top 3 pick in the end, and maybe a defensive prospect like Carson Kuhlman's, Badgers alum, who's right now doing pretty decently in the AHL, nothing spectacular, but could fit into Anaheim's bottom pair or middle pair in the future. But I think for Columbus, they have a lot of different options about forward and defense that I think Columbus would really like. As for my mock trade and what we could see with the Columbus Blue Jackets here, I think, of course, it would center around a prospect and a pick, but unlike this mock trade that which Bleacher Report suggests, to me, I think it would be the 2025 first rounder going back to Anaheim. I think Columbus is a lot more willing to give up that pick, but in exchange, they're going to end up getting top prospect Gavin Brindley, who I think would be a major blow to the prospect pool, what would be the major piece in the trade alongside that first rounder, who's done great in the NCAA, great in the past couple of World Juniors for the U.S., and defenseman Andrew Peeke, who is on maybe an overpaid deal, but I think Anaheim on that right side could provide some value defensively, and with what, of course, Verbeek likes with that physicality, Peeke can bring that. My main thing, though, is I think for Columbus, they are already a pretty undersized, pretty unphysical team, and I think adding Trevor Zegras would kind of just exacerbate those issues. They're already pretty awful defensively, already pretty awful in terms of physical play, and I think Zegras would honestly make it worse. To me, I think Columbus needs to add somebody a little bit more in a better overall game in that 200-foot game onto that middle six. Zegras would be awesome for sure, but again, they already have guys like Gaudreau and Kent Johnson and a lot of guys like that already, and to me, I think Zegras would kind of be a waste to go after. Next up, Lyle Richardson suggests, of course, the Montreal Canadiens, who we talked about a couple days back. Now, it's interesting what he kind of suggests here for a trade, saying the Canadiens have an extra pick in each of the first 4 rounds of the 2025 draft that they could use as trade chips. They're also loaded with promising young defensemen such as Arbor Xhekaj, Justin Barron, Jordan Harris, Logan Mailloux, and Mattias Norlinder, who they can draw upon to put together a trade package. So basically what I think Bleacher Report is suggesting here is that Montreal would end up getting Trevor Zegras. In exchange, the Ducks will get a 2025 first rounder, which I think will be the Calgary Flames, 2025 second rounder. This time, though, I would think the Montreal Canadiens will provide more value than Pittsburgh's. And then I would say defensemen out of this group, most likely to be dealt, is probably Jordan Harris and Mattias Norlinder. Now, as for my mock trade, we ended up talking about it a couple days back, and of course, some people agreed, some people disagreed. To me, though, again, it would likely surround players like Joshua Waugh, Josh Anderson. I think that 2025 first rounder, which is Calgary's, would definitely be in play, and defenseman Jaden Struble. You might have to add maybe another pick on top of this, but that's what I think this trade would probably end up looking like. But again, with Anaheim and what Pat Verbeek likes, he loves those physical presences. He signed Alex Killorn to that massive deal this offseason. Same thing with Radko Gudas. So I think he'll really like a player like Josh Anderson a lot more than other GMs. And again, it would likely have to include that first round. It would definitely suck to lose players like Joshua Waugh and Jaden Struble, but again, you have to give something to get something, and I think Trevor Zegras would be pretty awesome on that top 6. Now on to the fourth mock trade Bleacher Report is proposing here. The fourth team up is the San Jose Sharks, a team in the Anaheim Ducks division. Lyle says, while the Ducks might be reluctant to send Zegras to a close rival, they might be tempted if Greer made a quality offer. They could package the 2024 first rounder they received from the Penguins in last year's Erik Karlsson deal, or the second rounder they received last year from the New Jersey Devils, alongside with one of their prospects. prospects. Now, to me, I really don't get this one because I think it would have to include that 2024 first rounder and would have to include another top prospect on top of that. I mean, Pittsburgh right now isn't in the strongest playoff race position, but I think they're still kind of around that mid-range, and I don't think the first rounder is good enough to just send that and maybe an okay prospect back. It would have to be that first rounder and one of their quality prospects. So I think kind of what they're proposing here is a second rounder and probably like a Quentin Musty, but I just really don't see that happening. To me, this deal probably out of all these deals would have to be the most quantity over quality, because San Jose has a lot of options that I think Anaheim would like, and considering they're in the same division, Anaheim's asking price goes up exponentially. As for what the trade would have to look like, it would be a massive deal going back. For the players, I think Luke Kunin as a fourth liner for Anaheim could be a really interesting player going back, especially as an RFA. They'd be able to control his rights. As for the prospects, I think Kasper Holtonen would be a big one on the forward side. Big physical, fantastic shot who have London this year has put up some good results. And Jake Furlong, who's part of Team Canada's defense, as a more defensive presence, I think could really be interesting in Anaheim's system. But as for the picks, it would include the 2024 first rounder, which of course the Pittsburgh Penguins, a 2024 second rounder, which is the New Jersey Devils, and San Jose's 2025 third round pick. So a lot of options and a lot of quality going back to Anaheim, and that's what I think it would take. A lot of prospects, a lot of picks, and that's really it. For San Jose to get a player like that who's so much of a box office draw, especially to put him in the same division, Anaheim would have to get a lot back, and a lot, maybe even more than this, honestly. Now going on to the last potential fit for Trevor Zegras that they mentioned is the Washington Capitals. This one is pretty fascinating, especially considering where Alex Ovechkin is in his career and what Washington needs. Bringing in maybe an infusion of youth, especially that can be on the NHL roster now, would be a pretty interesting fit. Now they say that acquiring Zegras could cost Washington their 2024 first round pick as part of the return, along with one of their promising young players. Capitals general manager Brian McClellan could also draw on his 3 second rounders in the 2025 draft. What they're likely proposing here is the Ducks receiving the 2024 first rounder from Washington, 2025 second rounders from Washington and the Boston Bruins, and likely young prospect and player Connor McMichael. Now it's honestly not all that much different from my mock trade that I ended up proposing for Washington, and they would probably have to give a little more than this, but not too much more. Regarding the players going back to Trevor Zegras for Washington, I think they'll have to give up Connor McMichael. I think he would be a pretty big part of a potential Zegras trade, and of course this year he's starting to really play well after being in the AHL for most of last season. But I also think they'll have to give up defenseman Vincent Ioro, who has been a pretty big mainstay in the Capitals system over the past couple of years as a second rounder, big, smart defenseman that I think Anaheim will really, really like. As for the picks going back, I think it will be the 2024 first rounder from Washington and every single one of their 2025 second rounders. They have a lot to choose from, but I think they'd have to give up every single one of them. Again, I really don't think a player like Trevor Zegras is going to come cheap, and I think for Anaheim especially in a Washington trade, they'll look for NHL-ready quality players now, like a player like Connor McMichael, but I think picks will probably be a big part of it. I think Washington as well is going to give up a lot of picks for Zegras because, I mean, why the heck wouldn't you? Now is the time to get rid of those picks. But those are Bleacher Report's mock trades for Trevor Zegras, and honestly, there were some pretty good ones here, some ones that I disagreed with, but honestly, some of these weren't that far off. But I want to know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of Bleacher Report's mock trades? What do you think of mine? Which ones do you agree? Which ones do you disagree with? And of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you guys did enjoy, and of course, make sure you share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online to get those mock trades out there. And I will see you in the next one. Make sure you click on this trade or this this card right here for all of my tournament content right in one playlist. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great hockey day and goodbye.